When we moved down on the Elwha, why, we came from farm country and it was paradise. So most of the timber was old growth and the fish were everywhere.
It is a concern to us that people don't understand what we've lost. You know, they see what we have, but they don't see what we've lost.
Right.
The Strait of Juan de Fuca stretches 95 miles from Tatoosh Head west of Nia Bay to Port Townsend's Admiralty Inlet. The strait, which is upwards of 18 miles across, serves as the gateway between the Pacific Ocean and the Puget Sound. The Olympic Peninsula gave rise to some of the most productive forests in America, while the lush river corridors and estuaries produced one of the world's greatest fisheries. But life along the strait has changed over the course of just one generation. The reasons for the change are widely debated. But now, let's listen to the voices of the people who grew up and worked along the strait, people who couldn't have survived without its abundant wildlife. Let's hear their thoughts on what has changed and how we might recover what's been lost.
It was a great country and it was a great time to grow up as far as being free and what you could and couldn't do. Imagine an area like the Freshwater Bay on a Saturday morning having over 100 kicker boats working from there to Tongue Point. That was not unusual at all, and I've seen as high as 250 on a big holiday. The Rio Resort thing was going. I had 3 charter boats there.
I mean, there was no trouble getting elk or deer or bear or anything else. And of course, CQ was probably the premium salmon fishing spot at that time. I mean, it was just in the summertime, you were lucky to park within 2 miles of CQ.
We enjoyed the life here tremendously. I was born next at a house that was next to the beach, and we grew up literally with the beach as our playground and the forest as our playground also. We weren't afraid to go anywhere. But of course it was a gathering time too. You know, we would gather mussels, gooseneck barnacles, and also we went clamming.
All those creatures that he would identify, what were they now that you...
They were the seafood that we would eat. Mm-hmm. The chitons, or we called them China slippers. The sloop was octopus, and they'd show us where the octopus lived. My husband loved going after octopus. I loved eating it too. And sea eggs, or urchins, we called them sea eggs. And they were a real, we just loved all of that food. We could eat the sea urchins right away. Some ladies would eat the chitons raw. I never did, I liked them cooked. And our favorite actually was the gooseneck barnacles.
In Port Townsend was very poor. People were struggling in the sense of just getting enough money and resources for food and shelter.
The first several years after we were married, I had 4 little kids, all under 4. And so I was pretty busy here at home. And so Dick took care of bringing the fish home and the deer home and stuff that was important for us. The mill was done a lot, so we needed those things actually to eat.
So that was a pretty important food.
Yes, it was. It was important for him to fish. And he loved it, and that was fine, but it was needed. The fish were needed, and also the deer and the elk were needed.
One of the things that my mother would do, she'd give me a dime and go down to the wharf in Port Townsend. There'd be a fishing boat tied up, and you just tell the guy, yell at the boat, and somebody would come out and say, "I got a dime, what do you got for fish?" We'd get 15, 20 pounds of salmon and throw the dime down.
Rivers. River was semi-wild yet. Then it was still, there was still spawning grounds, silt gravel, everything. It was teeming with fish. literally there was no, didn't look like there was an end to it.
Our grandfather, the one who built this home, always got his fish from the lower Elwha, from the Clallam, from a Mr. Sampson.
So he bought the fish
And
from
he would
tribal
trade
members.
potatoes that he grew on his, because he had an 80-acre field, and he raised oats and potatoes and other produce. But he would trade Mr. Sampson, and Mr. Sampson would bring the fish to grandfather. Then he would take those fish and he would salt them. Yeah. He also, they didn't waste the fish. They made what they called fish sluda, which is fish head soup. Pick your eyes out of it. You don't eat the eyes of those fish. But it was very good because the cheeks, the salmon cheeks make good. Make it good. And it was with potatoes and milk.
For us kids that had to put gas in a car, we dug clams at night during the school year. And we'd go down to the beach and dig the tide, and whether it started at 10 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning, we were down there. And we'd make, anywhere from $40, $50, $60 a week doing that. And so that's how we put gas in our old junk cars, or even bought our old junk cars.
During tough times, you could always tell when somebody had been clam digging, because everybody would go to the movies, and then they would come in after they'd been digging clam. You could smell those clams, and anybody had been out clam digging, you betcha.
There were fish up and over the 100-pound bracket. In fact, the fisheries department probably won't own up to it today, but they had one in a freezer that was over 106 pounds until the point it was all dried up, basically. Whatever.
First year I was out there, caught a 50-pounder in the river. Caught a 50-pounder
in the Clallam River?
In the Hoko River.
Hoko.
That was actually the biggest salmon I ever caught in CQ, and I fished there for 30 years.
And there was also a very large herring fisheries in Discovery Bay during the 20s and the 30s.
My grandfather was the last traditional chief of the S'Klallams. He passed away in 1959. But as a child, I spent a great deal of my time in Jamestown with my grandparents. Spent a lot of time in the water as well as on the water. Learned how to crab at a pretty young age. I was helping my cousins pull their traps, and they're not the kind of traps that you have today. The traps that they had were made out of cedar strips and chicken wire, and very heavy to pull. But they had their extra income coming in there by selling the crabs on the weekends and up at Doopy's as well.
But we would come up the coast here with a midwater trawl, again work that had been developed at Oregon State for scientific nets and then transferred into the fisheries. With a midwater trawl, towing it at a given depth, targeting groups of fish by species. You could fingerprint them with acoustics, you could know what the group was. And turn around and come back down and adjust the net depth and width and height and scoop up the fish. And in those days the question was, who would catch the last fish? And would you be out there chasing it down with one of these boats? Which was not very efficient, obviously. We weren't going after one fish, but at least it was conceptually possible to go out and target a given fish and chase them down with a net. We didn't think of things at that time. The idea was, it was very much the old manifest destiny thing, because it was possible and we should do it. And people didn't think about limitations on the fisheries.
Mm-hmm. My main concerns were that the limits were too high. Had to spend a lot of time on the water. The bottom fish limits out there originally were practically unlimited, 15 per person. If you had 6 people on your boat, you had to catch a couple hundred fish before you could go home, and that was it was really unreasonable. That was more fish than anybody could use and really needed.
I think it would have been horrifying to our father to clear cut. And I don't think the answer to logging today is clear cutting.
Pulp mill.
And I went to work there in 49, and I was going to go into something else, and of course that turned into 42 years. But it was an incredible polluter through all that time. They dumped everything in the bay, and it's a wicked combination of chemicals that they used in the bleaching process at that time, and it was to get much worse because as they improved that process, they used even more violent chemicals, and everything went in the bay. A good deal of the time I worked in a finishing room, and you could see fry and fingerlings, you know, this size, come down the creek, and they would hit that stuff, and they just, that was it.
It's going to have to be a cooperative effort by everybody, or we're going to lose it. Now everybody, you can't blame an Indian, you can't blame a steelhead fisherman, you can't blame
Sports fishermen.
A sports fisherman, a commercial, the gill netters, everybody. You can't blame any single entity. Everybody wants a fish now, and there aren't enough fish.
I tell them the same thing. Elwha is not quite a dead river, but almost. It is on its last legs. It has virtually no wild stocks left. It has no spawning gravel, and they're on their absolute last legs, and they are irreplaceable. It won't turn it back. It won't turn it back if we take the dams, like even when I was a kid. And it bloody well won't go back to what it was, what I read about back in the late 19th century. But it will be ever so much better than it is. And I've had a lot of experience in restoration work, and we found out that, you know, you leave wild stocks alone, it's amazing if there's just a few of them left, what they can do. So I have great hopes for Elwha. I do.
If we do a better job of the shoreline management and restrict some of that erosion that goes on because people want to have grass lawns and for some reason want to cut down all the trees along the waterfront, which means those unstable clay layers end up on the beaches, we may be able to get back to the point where those clay beaches will go away and we'll end up with a harder pan, which gives you more biodiversity. You get more niches in the environment to restore animals that will survive in them. They may not necessarily be the specter of animals that were there 200 years ago. And we have pretty good information of what was here 200 years ago.
Stop the fishing totally. Everywhere. I don't know what you
Then when there get to be too many fish, they can open it up again. Yeah. You know, I mean, face it.
And a couple of years ago, I was off of the old village, which we call Jamestown, and I was crabbing. It was a beautiful day. It was nice and warm, and it was just nice to be on the water, and it was peaceful, and of course the seagulls are flying around, and they're picking up this bait. So I took this one cup and I just gave it a toss, and the bait went flying out there, and these two seagulls, they came together like this, nose to nose, with that piece of bait in their beaks, squawking and squawking, and their wings were flying, and they were squawking, and the wings were flying, and neither one was going to let that bait go. And I said, okay, I've got the resolution for this problem. So I took that bait and I threw it out there, and it landed right there between them, and they were still. They were squawking and everything, and I looked at that, you know, and I said, you know, that's what human beings do. They get into an argument, and they're nose to nose. They never see that right close to them is the resolution for that problem. If they just back off and think about it, you know. But we're always like this, and I think it has to do with what you were talking about, the fisheries. There are solutions, and they are attainable, but you got to give. You can't take it all the time. There's a time that you have to give to make it work. But the solution was there, they just didn't want to see it.
We can do more, we can do more, we can do more, we can do so much more. Look out there at that sparkle, seeing sky, shades of blue. What could be the problem? It's just so beautiful. What could be the problem? Well, here's a clue. I remember fishing with my dad. No electronics or other fad. Now there's no place left for salmon to go.